Good afternoon, and welcome to Aileen McCormack, Chief Commercial Officer of CarTrawler, and Axel Hefer, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of trivago. Welcome both. Hello. It's good to see you. And we are going to set the stage for this Phocuswright Europe conference. There's so much to talk about, given all the changes over the last year and a half, and you're going to share your thoughts on whether you think it's a blip or whether the landscape really has shifted. Just so many things to talk about. So let's get started. Let's start, first of all, with that 30,000 feet view, right? Where do we stand now? We've all been waiting for this recovery and the return of travel. What are you seeing from where you stand? And Aileen, maybe let's start with you.
Yeah, I think it's very different depending on which geography you're in. So for our business, CarTrawler is obviously a global business. We have partners in every corner of the world, so we get to see different viewpoints. I think the US for us, we're primarily a leisure travel business. We do car rental and mobility products, but the US is pretty much recovered. That's back to pre-COVID levels. So I think that's been, exciting to see. Europe is best way that I describe it, a bit of an emotional roller coaster. It depends on what mood the governments are in that week. So you can have situations where, certain markets are open and they're put on green lists and people can travel, but then it can change overnight. So from a consumer and a customer point of view, it's very challenging to plan or book a travel and book a trip. We also have, every country has a different rule when it comes to testing, costs of testing. If you're a family of four, they say the average cost to travel and do a leisure travel holiday in Europe at the minute, you add about €600 to the trip. And when you take into consideration all of the testing, and then other parts of the world like Australia, New Zealand, obviously, they've been closed off for international travel. We do have good domestic demand in those markets, but again, it's quite volatile. So I think it's very mixed, and we kind of had hoped that Europe would be further along than we are now, and we'd hope that I think the COVID travel passports would be in place by now. They're not, and there doesn't seem to be one holistic approach to that across all geographies. So it's been volatile. It's probably not as progressed as we thought it would be, with the exception of the States. And that's the kind of what the data is showing to us. And there's huge pent-up demand, which we'll probably talk about later. So we can see when countries open and have probably what I would consider practical, messaging and rules for traveling, and customers will be traveling. So that's what we've been seeing so far.
And Axel, you agree? Emotional roller coaster, the volatility. I bet you're seeing pretty much the same things.
I agree to pretty much everything that was said. I would say I take a slightly different angle. I think what was very, very important being based in Europe was the opening up that we've seen the last 2 months, because basically the teams and all of us have been completely exhausted by this very, very long period of lockdowns, isolation, just remote work, hardly any interaction with other people. So it feels much, much, much better now than it felt a few months ago. In terms of business, the positive view is the recovery has started, and they're not so much in Asia, but in Europe and in the US in particular. But I think it's also fair to say we are far away from a full recovery. So we still have billions of people that are not vaccinated, and that will last for a very long time. As long as you have that, you will have a continuous flow of new variants that will lead either to rational or irrational reactions from politicians around the world. And so because of that, it will stay difficult and more complicated to travel for, the next 1, perhaps even 2 years. But the key thing is for in a way, being in the industry and also running a business in the industry is that we are seeing continuous progress with some ups and downs, and that is what is very important, and that's what was very, very tough in the last couple of months, just to be stuck at the bottom in a very difficult individual personal situation and also in a very difficult business situation.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think to the point that that Aileen made about pent-up demand, we're seeing it certainly in the U.S. where I'm based. As soon as things open up, vaccinations reach a certain point, the demand is there. It's kind of the up and down of borders opening and closing and traffic lights and I guess the sudden slamming closed of doors that have been perhaps opened slightly, that creates that just up and down roller coaster. I think that's the best word for it. Let's also talk about sort of the kind of places that you're seeing that demand also, right? We've seen this in our consumer studies with more demand for the rural side of things, perhaps away from this crowded cities or destinations like that. Are you seeing that? And if you were to go on holiday, tomorrow, where would you go? What kind of destination would you choose? Axel, let's start with you. Oh.
No, go ahead, Axel.
So I'm hopefully going in 2 weeks to the Baltic Sea, so domestic travel and not a big city. So absolutely, we are seeing exactly that behavior. More conceptually, I think the common theme that we are seeing around the globe is that travelers tend to go to places that they know better and that they are closer to home and feel under more control. Because of all this friction, I mean, travel restrictions are imposed while you're actually on vacation, and the burden of coming back is enormous. So either domestic or neighboring countries that are almost like domestic, Mexico for US, for example, that feels like almost like home, are a lot more popular than they were before. And the other aspect, which is clear, is the cities are losing out currently because of a lot of the attractions in the cities are not fully accessible yet. Yeah, so the US, obviously, it's a bit better, but in Europe, a lot of big events are still not happening or under big restrictions. And the reason to go to a big city is not as attractive right now under all the restrictions as it used to be and as it will be in the future.
Right. And Aileen, where would you go?
I went to County Cork, which is a staycation in Ireland, so I didn't have any of my Spanish or Italian vitamin D this year, unfortunately. But I think in Ireland, the restrictions are very stringent. So like indoor dining, for example, isn't open in Ireland at the minute. If you're staying in a hotel, you can dine in the hotel, but none of the restaurants are open inside either. So Ireland also has, from some countries, like if you go to the States, for example, mandatory hotel quarantine, and you have to stay in a hotel for 10 days after you fly in. So in Ireland, personally, it's quite limited. The vaccination program's a bit slow as well. I'm not yet personally vaccinated, but as soon as I am, the first thing I'll be doing is getting on an airplane. In the States, all the ones, that Axel touched on, like Mexico, massive, Hawaii, and, issue that there aren't enough cars to rent there at the minute is more the challenge. Florida as well. And Portugal, we had a massive surge in Portugal when that was opened as a corridor from the UK. It's since been closed. And so it depends that the kind of the hotspots for travel that open, people will go there. But I think now there has been situations where a lot of the media and press are telling the stories of people getting stuck, as Axel mentioned. And so I think people are cautious when, countries do open, if they're going to stay open for the time in which you actually end up there on your vacation, if you have to stay there or come back.
Yeah. And just touching on the business travel side of things. So we've heard so many theories, right? Half of business travel is never going to come back, or a substantial percentage. Which side of the divide do you fall on? Are you saying, that it's never going to come back, or it's, it's going to have a big hit, or do you think it's going to come back and all these fears are just overblown? Aileen?
I think it's coming back. I think that, everything at the minute is so black and white. Like, I don't know if that's just the way that we report on media now, but I feel that I think that the pace of business recovery is just slower than that of leisure recovery. I don't think it's not going to come back. I don't think you're going to be able to replace that personal interaction that you have with your colleagues or partnerships or people that you work with. I think there is definitely and I know this is not just me personally, but there is kind of Zoom fatigue. People want to be out there meeting people, traveling. So I do definitely believe that business travel will come back. I just think the rate at which it recovers is going to be much slower, obviously, than leisure, but it will definitely be back.
Yeah. And Axel, where do you stand?
Yeah, I'm a bit more skeptical. I mean, I think business travel you basically can group into two categories. One is more relationship sales driven, and the other one is more transactional. And we used to travel a lot for purely update meetings, internal meetings, external meetings. And so for the relationship meetings, I do believe that there will be a surge actually once people are back in the offices, and then obviously it will also be reasons to travel to see partners in particular. So we might see a bit of a sign of overconfidence on business travel initially, similar to what we are seeing on leisure, whereas the transactional meetings, I would say for most companies will be substituted to a certain extent internally and externally. And if you believe in a more balanced working model overall in terms of working remote and working from the office, I think it's absolutely logical to apply the same concept to more transactional business meetings, which has to substitute a certain percentage. So yeah, I mean, some impact, but it will not be the end of business travel. But I think it will be noticeable.
So what you said, if I kind of can interpret that right, is that in the long term, we will see a reduced amount of business travel, even though it might come back very strongly, as we're seeing that in the US right now,
Exactly.
Very strong recovery. Okay, yep. Well, we'll have to wait and see about that. I think I fall on Aileen's side on this one, as I do believe that human connection and just the need to see each other face to face, that'll keep business travel going. But talking about business travel also brings me to kind of this point about sustainability, which we've been hearing a lot about, right? And it seems like everybody's kind of reconsidering from a company standpoint their travel policies. Consumers are perhaps a little more aware of the benefits now, having seen what the world looks like when there isn't that much airplane noise over your house, perhaps. But is it just talk from your perspective? What do you think? Do consumers really care once we get back to traveling again? Are they going to be willing to pay more? Aileen, maybe you have some thoughts there?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I definitely think people care. That's 100% the case that people do care about sustainability and the environment. I don't know what's going to happen in the kind of medium term when the cost of that essentially hits their wallet. So, people I think have the best intentions, but if you're merchandising, I haven't seen any data. I'd love to see this on your engine that this is the price of the flight, this is the price of sustainability, etc. And there's a 20%, 30% of the difference. I'd love to see, how that impacts conversion rate. So I think there's also a piece with the pent-up demand. I think Axel probably knows this from a kind of a flights perspective, but we can see the pricing of renting cars, mobility, etc. is all, with the pent-up demand is driving prices up. So I expect that for customers who do want to travel, it might be slightly more expensive. So then if you're to put, on top of that, the sustainability fee, so to speak, how is that going to impact their decision purchase? So I do think, to your first question, they care. I think if they're going to be charged extra for it, that will really, test how much they do care.
And Axel, what do you think?
It's very complicated because I think there are two fundamental trends that partially neutralize each other. I mean, one is more focus on sustainability and more awareness for sustainability, which is clearly there and clearly the case. On the other hand, also more focus on experiences, on spending time together, on unique memories, in particular in the younger age groups. And in a way, it's a conflict. Yeah. So you want to experience the world. On the other hand, that is not good for the planet. And I think the right offering that is differentiated will make a difference. Yeah, so I think it is a dimension that is considered. How much that is worth to the individual and to the mass market is very difficult to say. But I mean, we are only focusing on the accommodation, and there, I guess the only thing we can do is we can promote local travel, which is what we are doing, because that by a different mean of transport is by definition more sustainable. And the last aspect, which we can't control, is just the frequency of long haul trips. Yeah, so I would hope that coming out of the pandemic, that people will do fewer long-haul trips, but then longer, which is probably one of the biggest lever in addition to a new modern fleet by the airlines.
Yep. Well, again, I think you're right. And I think the industry is now a little more aware and playing perhaps a bigger role or taking a stronger stance rather than depending on consumers for offsetting their carbon emissions, etc. So I think that's going to be something that's going to be very interesting to see. And Aileen, you probably will see that more being on the B2B side, perhaps.
Yeah. We see it loads. Like we're introducing a green, channel to our engine where people can, filter just for, more environmentally friendly vehicles to rent or for if they're getting airport transfers. So, and that's coming from our airline partners. So, like we work with the likes of EasyJet and Emirates, and they're obviously super conscious of this topic. So, that it's great to see that all the airlines are very aware of it. And to your point, know that the onus is with them and they might necessarily have the option to pass it on to customers. So they need to take action.
Yeah. Axel, you mentioned accommodations. We have to talk about sort of what you're seeing there in terms of the hotels versus short-term rentals, just the whole shift that we've seen in the last year or so towards short-term rentals. Is that going to stay? What do you think that's going to look like?
I mean, the short answer is I don't think so, because we've seen a shift in a dramatically underutilized market, and in a market where you wanted to get out of crowded places into more isolated places. But then when you think about the steady state market, I mean, in terms of sustainability, we had a lot of headwinds for certain destinations in terms of alternative accommodation already. So over tourism just on that type of category. And hotels obviously scale much, much faster. So I think it will normalize to a certain extent, but it will not necessarily go back to where we started. So somewhere in the middle and in between. The other trend that started before the pandemic that I would expect to reemerge is this hybrid concept. So like a Sonder offering very standardized apartment experience, which is somewhere in between, almost like the best of both worlds of an apartment with your independent kitchen unit, etc., living room, but also the standardized experience potentially with some facilities to use that you are used from an hotel, which I think is a true market niche and an opportunity, which once the dust has settled, I think will reemerge and be very attractive.
All right. And we're coming to the end of our time here. So I have to very quickly ask you, talking about sort of, platforms, we've seen the rise of Amazon during the pandemic on the retail side. Will there be an Amazon of travel? And will it be Amazon or Google, perhaps? Just in one sentence, maybe. Aileen?
I don't know if there will be Amazon of travel. I think a lot of travel companies aspire to be that. I think some airlines are doing really amazing stuff. So I think some of the airlines, there's also some really great travel brands that are doing some interesting stuff in their apps. I don't know, there's some good ones to watch. Like I think we're starting a partnership with Hefer. They're doing amazing stuff. I think I'd be cautious of a travel company of Google, but I don't think it's going to be. I don't know if Google are going to compete with some of their biggest customers. So I don't know. Watch this space.
So
I'd love to see if one of the airlines. Yeah.
Okay. Axel, last word to you.
Yeah, I don't think so, because travel is something unique. It's very special. You travel because you want to spend time with people that matter to you and you want to experience something together. So in most families or households, it is the single point in time in the year that you're most looking forward to. So it's by definition something where you're thinking about a lot and you want to get really the best out of it, which means that one size fits it all will have always a disadvantage over more focused and more tailored offerings. And yeah, no.
All right, that was definitive. On that note, thank you so much, Aileen and Axel. It's great to kick off the conference with you both on. And thank you again.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Humans were born to explore, to reach for the skies, to connect with something bigger or smaller. to connect with each other, to see things through a different lens, and to become more at home with ourselves, the further from home we are. We're seeing the world differently these days. Travel has changed, and so have we. In a complex world, we've now made it simpler to travel safer by reimagining travel insurance that's less complicated, that removes hurdles instead of being one, empowering travelers to go more securely, making it simpler for our partners to manage on a global scale and navigate for the future, because for all its complexities, it's simply a world worth seeing.